You can see I have a simple counter and a button to increment that counter. It's a functional component. So on every click of that button, I am incrementing the counter by 1. So if I click on this, you can see this works fine. There is no issue. Now let's say I have another button, increment by 2. And I will duplicate this, make it 2. And I will duplicate this. So now I will call it on increment by 2. So now when I click on increment by 2 button, I'm calling set count twice. So the expected output is the count should be 2. So let's see if it happens. So when I increment by 1, it correctly increments, that's fine. When I increment by 2, you can see it's also incrementing by 1. It's not incrementing by 2. So what is happening here? So you should know that whenever you call set state, let's say this set state you are calling, so state will not update immediately. So you will not see that state updated immediately. So let's say I have a count here, I'm printing that one. So increment by 1. So whenever I increment by 1, you might think that count will be 1 here, but that is not the case. So when I click on increment, you can see on the UI it's 2, but in the log it's 1. When I increment again, it's 3, but the actual value displayed is 2. So when you call set state, React will not update the state immediately. It will schedule an update to the state. So during next render, it will update that state. So while this code is executed, the state is not updated yet. So when you execute console.log, the count value is still 0. So you see 0 initially. So every time you click on this button, you see one value less because that is the previous value or current value at that time while calling this. Similarly, here, when you increment by 2, you are incrementing here by 1. So count is currently, let's say initially it's 0. 0 plus 1, this will become 1. Now again, here you might think that count is incremented, but as I said, count is not yet incremented. So count is still 0. So you are again 0 plus 1 is 1. So even though you are calling set count twice, the count is still 1. So whatever the last value you are setting for the set count function will be the ones that will be updated. So when you call an event listener, React will execute all the code inside that function. And after that, during next render, React will check each of the state update and it will update that counter. So how to fix this? There is an easy way. So instead of using direct variable, like assigning a direct value to the set count function, there is another syntax. So instead of passing direct value, you can pass a function here that is known as state updater function. So you will automatically get the previous value of count and then you do previous plus 1. Now I will duplicate this. So what we are doing, we are using state updater function. So you will automatically get the previous value here of that particular count because you are setting count. Then you are doing previous plus 1. So here also it will not update immediately. So anytime you call set state, React will not update immediately. But when you use state updater syntax, React will queue those renders. So all the set state calls will be queued. So during next render, React will check what is the current value of previous state counter. So it's 0 initially. So 0 plus 1, it will become 1. During next set count, it checks what is the previous value. Previous value is 1. So 1 plus 1, this will become 2. So like this, if I have 3 set state call, then the final value of that counter will be 3. So let's see by 2 only initially. So this increments by 1, but when I increment by 2, you can see this correctly increments the value by 2 because these statements will be queued and React will execute them during next render. So every time React sees this set state call, it checks the previous value and it uses that previous value to find out the next updating value. So if I have 2 more set state call, so this will correctly execute and it will have 4 as the last value after calling this function. When you call increment by 2, this function will be executed. All the code state will not update immediately. As I said, every set state call, React will not update the state until it has executed all the code from that function. So all these set state functions will be queued and during next render, they will be checked. React will check each of them and it will check what is the previous value and that value will be used. So now when I increment by 2, you can see it's incremented correctly by 4 because I have 4 set state. So it's very important to understand. This is also common interview questions to identify if the developer really knows how state update works. But you will not see this code like written like this. So you will not be having multiple setState calls one after the another. This is a not a common scenario, but you might have a function, let's say display function, const display, where you are doing something, and then you are again calling set count. So you are taking count plus one. Doing some operation, then you are again setting count along with other properties if you have other state updates you have. So now here increment by two, I am calling set count. So now let me use that previous syntax, count plus one. So what I'm doing, increment by two, I'm setting set count and count plus one. Then I'm calling this display function, not set. So I'm calling display function, and in that display function, I'm again calling set count count plus. So what do you think output of this when you call increment by two? So here where initial count is 0, 0 plus 1, it will become 1. And then, as I said, React will not update the state until all the code inside that particular function is done. So here the count value is still 0, it's not yet updated. So it's again 0 plus 1 is 1. So even though you call increment by 2, its value is incremented by 1 only. So when I click, you can see it's incremented by 1 only, it's not incremented by 2. So it's very important when you call setState, you will not get that updated value immediately on next line. And if you want that updated value to be used, then you need to store that somewhere. So what if I want to use this? I want this updated value here. Count, let's say I'm making API call. Make this function a sync and import this. So I'm making API call to this JSON placeholder for this API. So I'm passing that user ID. So when I say 2, you will get second user. When I say 3, you get third user. So I am dynamically passing that count value and making API. So this is a common scenario. So you will have some code where you are setting state and you might think that the count is updated because you are calling and you are using that updated count. But this will not work. So let me make this count 1 initially. So if I refresh, when I call increment by 2, here you are setting incrementing that count by 2. So what will happen here? You are scheduling an update to made, so it will not be updated immediately. So it's 1, initial value is 1, 1 plus 1, it will be 2, but state is not updated yet. So during this code execution, the count is still 1. So you will not see 2. So for the second user, you will not get data, you will get only for the first user. So let me show you. The initial counter value is 1. When I click on increment by 2, you can see you are getting a record for user 1, even though count is 2. Now again, I click on this, now you get user 2, but the count is 3. So this is a common scenario. So you will be using some count and that you might think that it's updated and you might not get the expected result. So how can you fix that? So to fix this, you can store this value in any variable. So let's say result count plus 1. Now, instead of passing this count plus 1, you can pass the result. And the same result, you can use it here. So what is the advantage of this? So even though the state is not updated yet, so you have that updated value here in that variable that you are using. So now the counter will correctly increment and you will get that user with the exact same count. So when I increment by 2, count is 2, you will get a record of user 2. When I increment count is 3, you will get third user. Again incremented, you will get count with 4. So you are correctly getting this data. So sometimes you might want to get that updated value immediately. In that case, you store that in a variable and use that. So during next render, React will update that count and you will not have any issue. There is also one more thing you need to remember. So when I say, let's say increment by 1. So when I increment by 1, and let's say instead of this value, here, let's say I'm calling this display function. Let me move it here. And here I'm calling that display function. And now what I'm doing, I'm incrementing count plus. And let's say inside the display function, I am directly setting value 4. What I'm doing, I'm incrementing by 1. So this will become 1, but it will not be updated immediately. I'm calling display. Now I'm calling set count and directly passing the value 4. Now you might think that this is 1 and this is 4, so it will become 5. But whatever value you pass set count, so this is same as directly calling this. So what you are doing, you are incrementing by 1 and then you are setting count to 4. So the final output when you click on increment by 1 is 4, it's not 5. So if I increment by 1, You can see it's 4, and after clicking on multiple times, it's still 4. Why? Because you are setting this count to 4. So you are entirely replacing this previous value of count. So when you directly assign value, the all previous state updates will be ignored. They will not be used. So some now if you might have some code like this. So these are like interview questions. What will happen? What will happen? So when I call this set count 1, now the count will not be updated immediately, but this might you assume that count is 1, this will become 2, then this will become 4, and this again you are incrementing, so it might become 5. So this make your assumption, but that is not true. So here, when you directly pass any value, that will replace the previous value. So whatever set counts you have previous, let's say 3 set count, so even though this should be 3, this will not be 3, because as you know, you always get the current value. And here always you are setting, that means you are directly replacing. So here the value will become 4, and you are still counting 1 year initially. So count 1 plus 1, so it will become 2. So it will not have 4 plus 1 equal to 5. So if I increment by 1, you can see it's incremented by 1 only. Why? Because current count value is 1, and you are incrementing by 1. So count will become 2. So every time you are implementing, the count is incremented by 1. So no matter how many times you call setState, you still have the only the current value. So and when you directly pass, it will replace and it will remove all the previous state updates. It will ignore the previous state updates, and when you pass a new value, that will directly be replaced. But when you use updater syntax, it will not be replaced. So you can call it anything. I can call it count also. So now let's say this is the case, count arrow, count plus 1. So now I'm using updater syntax. So here what is happening, let me remove this. So this will become, so when you call set count, React will not update immediately. On next render, it will check each of these counts. So all these will be queued, and during next render, React will check each of them. So the initial count value is 1. So 1 plus 1, this will become 2. Then again, this count will be the previous count. What is the previous count? 2. 2 plus 1, 3. Now this 3 plus 1, it will become 4. 4 plus 1, 5. So when I say increment by 1, you are actually incrementing by 5. You can see you are actually incrementing by 5. Let me show you by making it 0. So you can see this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me add 1. Now you are incrementing by 5. You can see initially count is 0. 0 plus 1, this will become 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is how it works. But what will happen if I have set count here initially in between and I say 5? So when you call set count by directly passing value, as I said, all the previous set updates will be ignored. So whatever you set this value, all these will be ignored. So even though it's 3, React sees that it's you are directly assigning a new value. Now it will become 5. So this will change it to 5. Then 5 plus 1, this will become 6. 5 plus 1, this will become 6, and 6 plus 1, this will become 7. When I increment by 1, you are actually incrementing by 7. So what happens? 5 and then 6 plus 7. So you are always setting it to 7. So even if I increment by 1 again, you can see it's still 7. Because on every click, you are setting it to 5, then you are incrementing. So if I want to increment, let's say count plus 5. So now what will happen? The previous value, let me remove all of this. So now count initially 0. 0 plus 5 is 5. Then 6, 7. So now every time you click, you are incrementing by 7. So every time I click, you can see now incrementing by. There is one more thing you need to remember. So 2 weeks ago, I posted one post here. You can see how state updates are batched. So how you can improve performance by using React version 18. So when you have multiple state calls inside any event handler, those will be batched. So no matter if you are using React version 18 or below. So if I have multiple setState call, you can see here all these setState calls. So you are calling set count or you are updating the state. This does not mean that React will re-render 3 times. When it's an event listener, event handler, and you are using any type of version, React 16, 17, 18. So React will batch all of these together. So only one re-render will happen, even though you have multiple state calls. So not just set count, you can have set user object, and in that object you might be setting some object name might. So all these state updates will be batched together and React will re-render only once when it's an event listener or event handler. So only inside event handlers, all the state updates will be batched no matter which version of React you are using. So just because you have multiple state updates does not mean that React will render this component app component 4 times. All these will be batched together. So you can see here, so you can see with version 18 of React, React batches together multiple state updates into single render site. So when you have multiple state updates, those will be batched. But this is done only inside the event handler. So if you see, if you are using React version less than 18, only updates inside event handler functions are batched. So if you are using some state update or set state inside promises or set timeout function or native event handler, those will not be batched. If you are using version less than 18, but with version 18, everywhere those state updates will be batched. So that is a performance improvement. So with version 18, you get better performance. With the React version 18, no matter where you are calling set state, inside promises, set timeout, or native event handler, all these will be batched and you will have single re-render. You will not have multiple re-render. But if you are using version less than 18, then if you are using set state in promises or set timeout or native event handler, those will have a separate re-render. So you will have multiple re-render happening. So with version 18, so you will get better performance of it. So this I have posted on my LinkedIn. So if you are not following on LinkedIn, do follow because I regularly share some useful tips regarding React and Stack. So that's it about this video. I hope you learned something new in this video. So this is a common interpretation. What will happen if you increment this by this without this updater syntax when you directly pass the value or when you pass any updater syntax in between if you I say set count to 5. So what will happen? So these are common interpretations. How React 18 improves performance when using state updates. These are common interpretations. So that's it for this video. If you found this video, do like it and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.